we affiliated with American Dental Partners as their second affiliate. And of course, that was very foreign to us. We had no clue what that meant. I was not a principal in the practice. We had one sole owner, and it was his idea to say, hey, we think we ought to do this. And we thought, okay, great. What does that mean? And we didn't understand the DSO world. The DSO world, I don't think, understood us.
This is the Open Wide Podcast with your hosts, Scott Drucker and Jinesh Patel.
All right, and welcome everyone back to another episode of the Open Wide Podcast. I am your host, Scott Drucker, here with my co-host, Jinesh Patel.
How's it going, everybody?
We're going to jump right into our guest conversation today. We've got with us someone that was not on my radar, but a fellow dentist that Jinesh connected through to the team here at the podcast, Dr. Ray Scott. Welcome, Dr. Ray. Welcome, Ray. How are you doing?
Hey, good. Glad to be here, guys. And I don't know who came up with the name of the podcast, but pretty catchy. I like that.
Scott, I'll give him all the credit for that. It was
okay.
All right. But Jinesh and I went back and forth on the logo. Hope that's good too. My wife helped out with it. Shout out to her.
We always need the wife's perspective on when we do anything. When we do anything, we're like, are we good at art? Are we good at perception? And we both trust our wives more than we trust ourselves.
Well, that's a good place to start. For a guy that's been married for 45 years, I think it's always good to pass muster there. You're wise guys, for sure.
There you go. Amen to that. All right. I'm gonna take a moment to introduce you. So Dr. Ray Scott got a DDS from the University of Texas Health Science Center in San Antonio. He spent over 3 decades growing both the organization and the people and the teams at Caris Dental. I think I pronounced that right. And it was originally Longhorn Dental and rebranded to Caris. It was Chief Dental Officer at American Dental Partners, or ADP, through the acquisition by Heartland Dental. He stayed on with Heartland Dental for a while as VP of Clinical Operations. And this is me editorializing, but aside from focusing on care delivery with a patient-centric focus and savviness for growing dental practices, Dr. Scott has deep understanding and appreciation for corporate governance, operationalizing practices and groups by implementation of systems and processes, change management, and regulatory compliance. Is that a fair enough summary there?
Yeah, man, that's a lot of stuff. Sometimes you have to take a step back and go, wow, that's a lot of stuff. But, it's over a long period of time, too. So, I think that's good. Thanks for the intro. I really appreciate it. When I think back on some of that and thinking about being at the chair for about 25 years and then how that overlaps into all that other stuff, and kind of being a learning process along the way. Solo practice, I've been an associate, part of a group practice, and then certainly a DSO, and learning each step of the way about how things work. It's been an interesting run, and where I am today after I left Heartland, just doing a little bit of consulting and mentoring along the way, and doing a little bit of advising for some startups and such. So still keeping my fingers in it, but it's been an interesting ride, a long run.
I'm sure you have a lot to share. Maybe we can give the audience a little teaser of all that knowledge bank here today.
Okay.
I'll say I think your smartest move so far is changing the name of Longhorn Dental. As a Texas A&M Aggie myself, I respect that decision and think.
But our market, we were in Austin, so it just kind of made sense. That's where we got started, and so being Longhorn made sense. But I do appreciate the fact that you're a fighting Texas Aggie. I think every family's got one, and I've got one of those in my family too, one of my daughters. So. Thanks for the kudos there.
Your favorite daughter, right?
And that's a tough one because I have 2. If I only have one, and neither one of them are going to hear this podcast, so I can speak freely, I guess. But having daughters is great. I have a tech daughter and an Aggie daughter, so I got a little bit of both.
There you go. So if you can, we'll maybe start at the beginning of your journey. Talk us through time at Longhorn/Caris and how you got started there, how you kind of built up in involvement and I suppose cut your teeth on growing an organization, bettering the performance of the organization, and that sort of thing. It seems like you really kind of spent a long time laying the groundwork there for what you then went on to do at other organizations.
Yeah, thinking back to that time in my practice life, I was still a practicing dentist at that point in time, and I had a particular skill set that they needed, which was I was a person that was an exodontist kind of. I did general dentistry, but I took out a lot of teeth, and they needed that on the team at the time. And we had one location, and it was a multiple doctor practice. We weren't really what I would call a group practice at that point in time, but we were right down in the central part of Austin, and came in, learned a lot about taking care of patients, learned a lot about how to work on teams, learned a lot about working with other doctors and how they have different opinions on stuff. And that was really formative for me. We got to a point in time where this thing that we all call a DSO now was starting to take shape and come to the fore. And we affiliated with American Dental Partners as their second affiliate. And of course, that was very foreign to us. We had no clue what that meant. I was not a principal in the practice. We had one sole owner. And it was his idea to say, hey, we think we ought to do this. And we thought, okay, great. What does that mean? And we didn't understand the DSO world. The DSO world, I don't think, understood us. But we were, at that point in time, we were just a bunch of doctors that practiced in the same place together. That was all it was. And we found in a very short time that we needed to become a doctor group and practice like that, because the spotlight came on us and they wanted us to grow. We went from those 4 or 5 practices in the beginning we had about 35 locations that were multi-specialty. It took us about 20 years to build that, but we had the full backing of American Dental Partners. And so we thought, well, how are we going to get this structure and how are we going to create the ability to scale? And this thought of accreditation came along, which gave us a lot more structure, which we had none. We had no processes. Each doctor practiced independently under the same roof. We didn't look at the intake of patients the same way. We didn't look at anything the same. So it's really hard to scale and grow and make it be something that's repeatable if you don't have some kind of structure and process. So that was the first thing that we learned about that we needed to get to become really consistent and have accountability and be doctor-led.
Right, on that point, you use the word accreditation. And I feel like coming from the medical side, that's a word we hear all the time. I'm not quite sure, and Scott, correct me if I'm wrong, if this is a word that you guys utilize a lot in dentistry. Can you expand on what that means to you when you say it and what you were trying to implement in your practice and like how that manifested inside of your practice? Like,
I think that's a good question, Jinesh, because really a good thought, because I think we're viewed on the medical side. Dentistry is kind of the wild, wild west when it comes to anything that relates to structure and process. When you start talking about outcomes, are you measuring outcomes? Do you have, doctors always, particularly in dentistry, we want doctor autonomy. We got to have doctor autonomy. And then the governance, how are decisions made? We had none of that. And we wanted to make sure that we had a voice in our organization that put the patient first. We wanted to be very patient-centric. We wanted to be about quality of care. There's not really, particularly then, there wasn't anything out there that could put you on the track to be able to do that. So then we started looking at, well, what can we do? And so that's when, Jinesh, we started to seek out how we could do that. And the AAAHC, or the Accreditation Association for Ambulatory Healthcare, which is why we call it AAAHC, I guess, is what we kind of latched onto, thinking about wanting to have a lot of structure and a lot of process. But you talk about an uphill climb, because it's foreign in dentistry. You guys that work on the medical side, like you said, you talk about that all day. How you want to get something into a practice. Well, we'll go through the quality assurance committee and we'll get it into the clinical side of things and see if it works. And if it does, great. And then there's some things on the governance side from an operating side, from an operating perspective, that have to work hand in hand with the clinical. And we didn't get that. We sure didn't get it. We also wanted to improve our reputation. We were a group practice in Austin, Texas, which was, taboo. Solo practice was still the way to go. And we were a bunch of guys practicing together. At the time, we were all guys practicing together. We had these aspirational thoughts of, man, let's grow this thing. And, we get all this money coming in from ADP, we thought, and we can really, really grow it. And they said, great, let's do that. But you got to have good results. Again, more while we thought about accreditation.
On that point, and you mentioned that you were the second affiliate to ADP when you first joined. And it was also a new concept on its own. Scott and I talk a lot about entrepreneurship and like startups and like kind of learning as you go through the process. I imagine you went through a lot of learning moments, kind of helping create these first affiliate or group kind of programs. Are there any that you look back on and you're like, a wild moment that probably most people don't know about here's how we started ADP, or here's how these early days went before it became more professionalized as we see it today?
Well, yeah. I mean, you talk about flying by the seat of your pants. We had no idea what we were doing. There were a couple of groups out there that had formed that were pretty sophisticated for the time. One of them was Park Dental in the Minneapolis-St. Paul area, and they had a lot of structure and process. They were very organized. They had gone through the accreditation process, someone else that we looked up to. And we thought, we got to do that. We got to really put that stake in the ground and say, this is how we're going to operate. But I can remember going to meetings, ADP meetings early on, and there were about 6 affiliates. And we would sit around smoking cigars and drinking scotch and trying to figure out, well, we got this thing now. What do we do with it? And kind of relying on one another to start to build this. And I have some great friends, wonderful mentors that came out of that. Jessley Ruff was one of them. He was out of Wisconsin and Forward Dental. And he was the guy that kind of set all this stuff in motion and kind of the guru for all this. And thinking, Jess, I had many calls with him. How do we do this? How do we get people on the same page and start talking about quality? And the pushback from the doctor is, well, the state board regulates what I do. Now, the organization is not going to have any oversight on me. And you're thinking, well, they kind of got a point there. But when ADP is looking at, well, we're infusing money in here, and how you guys are going to grow, the doctor group has got to come together. And I think that the first thing for us was coming together on the governance side, setting up structure where we had a leadership structure, where we had, the opportunity to be shareholders in the organization. So we had this kind of skin in the game, and starting to think about, all right, what are we going to do? We say we're going to do this. What do we want to do this? And we didn't want to go backwards to who we had been for a group practice. And not only on top of that, this is not a disparaging comment for anybody that does managed care, but that's what we did at the time. We were high volume, rock and roll every day. And, you couldn't make mistakes and have to do stuff over again. You had to do it right the first time. And so we wanted to be that way, but we also wanted to be kind of focused around how do we improve what we do and be about quality of care.
So is that the governance side and like the just overall organizational effort of what you were putting together and looking at Park Dental and saying, looks like they went through Triple HC or whatever organization they went through, but they went through an accreditation process, and you kind of utilize that a little bit as a blueprint to get your own act together.
And kind of from that, it became a committee structure, and so we wanted to have, when we started looking at what we needed to do, what are things that you utilize all the time? Well, product and technology. Well, we need a product and technology committee. Let's have doctors that are, about that, looking at products and helping us decide. We had a laboratory committee. We had a peer review committee so that we could deal with things internally. We had a hygiene committee. There were so many things that we did, and people think, oh my God, you had committees. Didn't that slow you down? Kind of. But it also gave structure, and it gave people a voice, which they so really wanted to have. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of foundational when you start to think about accreditation.
Yeah, I want to I want to dive in a little bit just for the audience that may hear this, say, oh man, there's this accreditation process if I want to take my practice or group to the next level. Can you share a couple examples of steps or things that you went through to get that accreditation, systems or processes you implemented? Just, a couple examples of you leveling up through the accreditation process.
Well, first of all, we had no idea how much work it was going to be. It's very hard. And the medical model, Joint Commission, those in medicine, they're used to that. They're used to going through a process where they have to not only say they're going to do it, but they have to document what they're going to do, and then they do it, and then they live to it. There's a lot of accountability. There are audits that go on. So we had to really think about how we changed the culture. And sitting down with the doctors at first, and we started with the patient record. And this is back in the old days when we had paper, but we started with a paper record and decided how we were going to use it. That was the first protocol that we had to get on board, the way that we were going to intake patients. And then once we decided that, we had to write it all down, which was, we were going to do how we were going to look at it, how we were going to view an exam. That was very foundational. We were going to say we were all going to intake the patient the same way. We're all going to record data the same way. The elements of an exam were all going to be the same. That was one of the very first things that we did. And then the second thing was getting team and staff on board. And we all the time talk about OSHA, HIPAA, high tech, all those things now that are kind of commonplace in the practice. We're really pretty early on in thinking about those things. But we had to be compliant with all that. If there was a state regulatory issue, a radiation safety, let's say, and we wanted to make sure that we had things that we were building upon. So the record was one thing. The way that we viewed our facilities was another. We had to be up to speed on OSHA, bloodborne pathogens. Pick something on that side of the house. And then at the same time, the doctors had to see the value and the team had to see the value in wanting to do it. Because most of the time they were like, no, we don't want to do this. So it was turning a battleship pretty much to get people on board and thinking about it.
That's great. So to reflect back on a comment you made before about committees, and yes, them being a lot of work, but them also being, I'd call them really effective tools. And I'll share just an example of something that came up in conversation a lot with me at Supply Clinic in conversations with different DSOs and groups and whatnot. All too often I had the conversation where it's like, hey, best practice in terms of your supply procurement is building a formulary, right? You build a standard set of supplies and materials that everybody's going to align on and use. And it's beneficial for a number of different reasons, not the least of which is if you order more of fewer number of SKUs, it's going to cost you less money. Right? But the pushback we would get on a regular basis was, well, I can't tell my doctor what to do, or like, I'm going to get so much pushback and whatnot. And then my response was like, okay, well, understandable. Yeah, I totally see how that's going to happen. But how about if you have your chief dental officer create a committee, or he or she, him or herself, basically go through the process of putting together the formulary. And so you then have a team that goes through a process that's then accountable. It does a couple of different things. One is you get involvement of the team, and that's a really powerful thing. Number one. Number two is when you inevitably have others in the system complain, oh, why did we use composite X and not Y? Why do we use implant A and not B? It's, well, we had a process that the clinical committee went through and describe that for you. You can talk to Dr. XYZ and understand that a little better. And it's a really powerful thing. And so just to your point there.
Extremely powerful. And I think the first question I would ask that naysayer that said, why aren't we using composite C? My question for them would always be, we would love for you to be on our product and technology committee. And so the next time we do a process that we're going to look at, I want you to be on there, and I want you to be a reporting member. We really value what you've got to say. And for all the right reasons, we want to give you a voice. And we understand that maybe you didn't get your way with the first product, but you will have a voice moving forward. And that's what that committee structure is all about. And, and the procurement guys love that because they don't want to have to negotiate, right, with 75 different composites and then think about the supply line on the operating side. You're starting to kind of narrow things down for all right reasons. And we didn't pick, because we had that product and technology committee, we did not pick the cheapest stuff. Our doctors almost never pick the cheapest stuff, but they picked what they got the best results with. And when we would roll that up, that had to be respected, right? Now we're talking about the choice that the doctor has and the autonomy that the doctor has at the chair. They have a voice. They pick that. So now DSO, you need to go out and find the best price on that. We don't care where it is. This is the product we want, and that's what we selected. And it worked. Then you would go back in and, procurement would then be tasked with going out and finding, whoever could get it at the best price, and we all benefited.
Right. And if that naysayer says, you know what, I don't want the work, I don't want to spend the time to be on the committee, well, then they kind of gave up the right to complain, right?
Well, I would tell them something a little more forceful than that, but if you don't want to participate, don't bitch.
There you go. Right.
That's exactly it. I feel like we all go through those moments, especially in like the early parts of any company. You're like, here are the things that we want to do. Tell us, how you feel about it. Give us comments and feedback. And at this point, this is the last time you're going to speak up. And if you don't speak up now, if you say something later, I'm not listening to it.
Exactly. So it's your chance to have a voice. Again, that's very important. And to me, that's part of being having doctor autonomy. But it's kind of guided autonomy. Because the other big part of that is we didn't want to introduce a new doctor into our system from a recruiting standpoint, onboarding, that had to figure out how to use what's the best product I need to use. Mm-hmm. It was a way for us to not just normalize a formulary, but also be able to teach, train, and mentor and troubleshoot when a doctor was having problems with a product. I can't get that composite to work. Well, are you using it right? Well, no. Then that's your problem. But we knew what they were using, so we were able to troubleshoot a little bit better. And it was another reason to have that formulary system.
Yeah, it's just a cleaner, simplified playbook, right? Formulary or procurement aside, for any operating procedure, it's just so much easier to manage and then scale. On that point, I want to kind of understand a little bit. So you were the second affiliate, or the first affiliate, so second office at that grew and ultimately was acquired by Heartland Dental not too long ago, maybe a couple of years ago, if I recall. Talk me through when you went through the acquisition, there must have been a bear of change management to deal with, to tackle, right? Because you were a big entity and then got acquired by an even much bigger entity, right? And I'm sure they had all their systems and processes and supplies and technologies that they used. And there was a change process that had to be walked through. So you could guide us a little bit on what your thought process and approach was there.
Yeah, understanding that change was coming. That's first and foremost, right? And that we weren't going to be left alone to just kind of do what it was that we were doing. We had some similar systems. We had some similar values. We had a different culture, and we at American Dental Partners had to learn Heartland's culture because we were required. It wasn't the other way around. Some things that we held dear, maybe not so much for Heartland. This accreditation process, for example, was a very, very near and dear to our hearts at ADP, but not so much at Heartland. Heartland felt like that. The doctor in the practice had full autonomy over what they wanted to have and what they wanted to utilize. That was a huge culture shift for our doctors, coming from an organization that made decisions as a group, made decisions via committee, to now their practice was a standalone. In their eyes, even though they had been part of a 35 in our world in Texas, a 35 practice group, or in Forward, they might have been 60 practices, or Metro, the same kind of number, to where now they weren't going to be. And so the first thing we that I always talked about was, what do we do that's similar? Let's gain some trust by what are the similar things that we do. And then from there, think about how we branch out and enhance from that, gaining that trust from those doctors and team members, so that some of the things they could bite off and it was not difficult. We were not a group that scanned. And we had 300 and something, around 300 practices. Only about 60 or 70 scanners is all we had. Heartland's, that's one of the main things they do is scan. So we had to get doctors on board with that so that they could understand the economy of working with specific laboratories that you could scan to, which meant you were going to have to change labs. And, as a dentist, that's a hard thing to do. Doctors, my thing was, they have 80 or 90 labs that they're affiliated with. Certainly you can find one or two that you can work with. And we spent a lot of time with testimonials and that sort of thing from doctors that were successful using those laboratories in Heartland to talk to our doctors at American Dental Partners. So that was one thing. Another thing was software. We had our own proprietary system and that we had developed, and it was called Improvis. And that was not what Heartland used. That was not their operating system. And so that was something that needed to change day one. And credit to their IT folks, they took that on, and we went through that change for all 300 practices, and we did that in about 9 months. It was incredible conversion rate. So we had to go through learning and training on that. So some of those bigger things you just knew were going to change. And then it was figuring out how they operated on the operating side. We were used to a doctor group and doctors coming together and making decisions, and that's not really how it works there. It's not bad; it's just different. And that was the other thing I talked about a whole lot. Change is not a bad thing, and what they do is not bad. It's just different, and
when you mentioned
it's better.
When you mentioned different, especially in that world, like let's say it's in the procurement side, like you said, you had committees that kind of told you which are the best things to buy or that are the most efficient, and it's done through doctor-led voices, and here it's more autonomous. Like how did you feel about that difference? Like was your immediate reaction like, I don't know if this is going to work for us and our team is going to be able to make that jump? Or did you have this more, arms wide open, we can go back where we were and it's not a regression?
A good question, Jinesh. And what you have to know about me is I'm the eternal optimist. And I was like, number one, we had to make it work because we were not on our own anymore. We were part of the bigger whole. And there were some things I thought, but man, take for example their ordering system, Heartland's ordering system. They had just rolled out, which was Dentura, and I thought, man, this is really a good thing because you're going to be able to go into that system and you're going to be able to know exactly what the price of this is and how how it's going to work and get to your practice. It was a great system, and I wanted to move our doctors towards that. So I thought that change was good. I thought change like moving to a different laboratory and how we got to that was good. And the other thing you have to understand about Heartland is it's an aligned incentive model. So if the practice does well, the doctor gets a piece of that aligned incentive or that profitability at the practice level. So you want to do well at your practice and you want to manage it well, and you want to, which is a great thing. We did not have that at American Dental Partners. The model in that particular portion of the conversation was really, really important, and I think also helped with the change because they could make more money than what they were making and treat the same patients. And then thinking about, well, why do I want to get on board with the formulary that you talked about earlier, Scott? And now they were changing to a different formulary. And the reason is because these prices are incredible, and you're going to get a piece of that if you move to that. You didn't have to. You could stick with the same products you had. If you wanted to give up part of your financial opportunity, you could do that. But most of the time, doctors pretty smart. They figure it out. Hey, okay, I can make a few more dollars here. Yeah, you can. And so that, along with the other things that were changed, a big change for us was the opportunity for continuing education. We had a lot of it in our organization, but not to the level that Heartland does. Heartland is, they're from my experience, I don't know the other big boys, but from my experience, they're They are absolutely the best in terms of bringing the CE to you, you getting to be able to go to great courses, things that might be of interest to you, and be able to change the way that you practice, and the services that you offer, which was a big part of moving into that, and why it was could be such a good thing for the individual practitioner.
I want to double click on something you just mentioned, which was aligning incentive. And you've been through the organization now from 2 locations all the way up through growth, and via presumably lots and lots of M&A activity. What do you think? There are a whole bunch of models out there today. What do you think is the best structure to structure these acquisition deals to best align incentive going forward?
Yeah, sure. Good question, Scott. I think that the first thing is it's got to be a collections model for the doctor, based upon what it is that they create with their own 2 hands. And so they're going to be involved with the dentistry that's done, staying on top of people to make sure dollars are collected, whether it's local or whether it's centralized or decentralized. They're going to be involved in the collections process. Mm-hmm. So I think that's important. I think when you think about reimbursement and fee schedules, doctors are a little bit more in tune to that if they're in a collection model where it's aligned incentive. Collection model, figure out what your percentage of collections is going to be. It's going to be different by group. It's probably going to be anywhere from about 25 to 30%, maybe a little bit more than that. And then beyond that, I think all the costs that are involved with things like laboratory services, I think need to be included, if you will, in that percentage, and not have some kind of formula where you're extracting that and bringing it back in. And the reason is because you get more scale now. Doctors are choosing a laboratory because the fee is greater, or what they're charged. If it's $200 a crown versus $70 a crown, and the quality is the same, why wouldn't they not want to use the one that's $70 or $75 a crown? So now you're beginning to align the incentives, and it allows the operating team to be able to go out and negotiate with those laboratory services, and you're going to get the same price at a better thing if you have enough scale, right? But you're getting people to think the same way. And then supplies is very similar to that. You can begin to motivate, shape behavior if the doctor knows that if they run their practice well, they're going to be rewarded by that. And that's a pretty big deal. If your practice is run well, now that's a reflection on your practice, on your region, and maybe ultimately the whole DSO. So now my incentives are aligned. I know it's going to be a collections-based thing. I know if I manage expenses well, to include people in that, with oversight from the DSO, laboratory services, supplies, all fit into that first line of profitability. And so if we're managing that and I'm getting a piece of that, I'm going to be a little bit more motivated. If the organization says, God, Ray, we need to get you to work, another day or two, I'm going to be motivated to do that because I know there's going to be something in it for me as well as the team. Then beyond that, if now we're continuing to align things, if the team has the opportunity to bonus out of that same pool, whatever that number is for you to be profitable as an organization, if you go beyond that, the team should be able to benefit from that too. So now I've got aligned incentive, not just with the doctor, but I've also got it with the team and the practice. And then if you push down further than that, and now I'm an owner in the overall organization, if I have an opportunity to be an owner in Holdco, then now it's a peer thing, right? Now I'm talking to my other peer groups, my other peer practices about how we become successful in doing that. And then it flows through again, because now the value of Holdco is more. And then there are other incentives along the way that were done there to incentivize for having a productive hygiene department. Whereas if I'm an owner in Holdco, I might have an opportunity to profit from what they do in hygiene. So beyond what I'm doing with my own 2 hands, but things that I can now influence, and hygiene is a big one. As a clinical leader in my practice, and you get better care for the patient. Now you're not talking about just going through and doing prophies and such. You're talking about actually treating and managing the disease. more scaling and route planning, whether it's localized scaling and route planning. Now you're talking about preventive services. Why aren't we doing fluoride on sealants and those kinds of things that are really, really good? Now everyone's aligned and we're helping float the whole boat, which is Holdco.
So I'm going to reflect and rephrase just to make sure that I'm getting it all. Basically, there are a few different levels of aligning incentive. The first is at the individual person level. Let's say the individual does a certain amount of dentistry. They see a percentage of what's collected on that dentistry that's done, maybe less some percentage of lab expenses, supply expenses, et cetera, so that people aren't super wasteful. And then if we sort of zoom out one level, a number of organizations have what they'll call JV equity or ownership in the individual practice at the practice level. And what that looks like or manifests in is essentially like a bonus based on profitability of the individual brick and mortar practice. So, different groups will do things a little bit differently, but some will take a management fee, but then pay out, a certain, they have to hit a certain percentage of profitability, and then they'll pay out a bonus based on, whatever equation is in their contract. And then if you zoom out another layer, there's this holdco or holding company equity, which is, we'll call it equity in the overall organization, which basically is stock in the whole organization that is worth something at the time of a sale or a recapitalization. So, there are lots of conversations where folks feel differently about getting more JV equity versus holdco equity, not wanting holdco equity because they don't have control over sale or recap of the so to speak. Do you get in the weeds with the doctors that you're looking to bring in as partners, and what's the general vibe? What do you see as most of interest to them? And are there any conflicts between what they want and what the holdco wants?
Well, again, another really good question, another good line of questioning there. And I'm going to take you back to something you said about contrasting a couple of different models. Because I was in a model that we had to pay out the service fee before we got to our profitability, and then our profitability was X. And it was a percentage of what we did. And the only people that got to share in that were doctors that were owners of the professional corporation. So it was very local. I think when now you think about the aligned incentive and, if it is a JV and you've got, depending on what your percentage of ownership is in that practice, if it's less than 50%, which probably in most cases it is, it's still kind of the same thing, because you're still slicing and dicing. You're trying to do well in your practice. You're trying to create income with your own two hands. And so you're going to be relying upon what you're doing, how well is your team function and all those kinds of things. So JV is kind of the same, but you may also have some kind of requirement. If your group is going to grow and you're an owner now, in the local DSO, if you will, if it's a smaller local kind of thing, maybe asked to invest part of what your percentage is, 30%, to roll forward and grow your organization. I'm a believer in, if you can have an opportunity, if you're a smaller DSO and you're a doctor owner and you have the opportunity to own part of that holdco, there's going to be a capital event at some point in time. Whether or not you 100% agree with the way things are running or not, those guys at 40,000 foot, they're not looking to sell it for, 1 or 2X. They're looking to sell it 5, 10, 15. They want to make money. That's what they're there for. Why would you not want to be attached to something like that?
Right.
Now, I'm only thinking about successful organizations. You may be thinking about the flip side of that when someone is not successful. And depending upon what your investment is, you're right. It may be that maybe that's not a good choice. But did we talk about that with doctors that we were going to bring in on the M&A side? You betcha. And they wanted to know about it. They wanted to know what their upside was. And in some cases, they were deciding between DSOs based upon that. I think it's really cool when there's a recap that a lot of people get rewarded and not just the C-suite.
I think that on that side, the way you talked about it is people are now probably doing more diligence on the DSO they join if there is holdco equity, because then you have this like you mentioned, you think about the positive side that people are going for 10, 15x. And then there's also the flip side of people who maybe didn't. If you're joining a DSO, I hope you're not joining one that you believe is not going to have a great outcome. And at least looking at that level of what am I actually joining at the top of the structure? Who is managing it at the top of the structure? How have they done in their past? And then is that worth my equity or that involvement level? And I think that's a great way to start thinking about like who do you align yourself with and what incentive as well.
I feel like it's so hard though for dentists in the weeds that have been running their independent private practice for 30 years and are looking to partner in. How the heck do they know how clean the finances are at the top of the organization? They just don't have that visibility, right? So
They don't. They don't.
it's a leap of faith in a sense. I know a lot of practitioners that effectively write off the holdco equity in the equation. They're like, okay, maybe we'll recap, maybe we won't. If we do, that's great. It's an extra payday. But they're just they're really good at doing what they do. Hopefully, the dentistry and running their practice. But man, from the finance perspective, they're just fish out of water.
Well, you're 100% correct on that, and I think that is one of the shortcomings that we have in dentistry on the education side. I came out of dental school. I could do all phases of dentistry. That was not a problem for me. But I can remember once we affiliated with American Dental Partners, and I became the doctor leader of the group. They sat down. They said, "Okay, we're going to have a financial meeting. We're going to go over the P&L." And my first question was, "Well, what's the P&L?" And I had sold my practice. My practice was the first roll into American Dental Partners, not just in Texas, but the whole ADP. Exactly what you're talking about, Scott. I had no clue. I was a cash accounting guy. We made money. We had money. We spent on stuff. If we didn't, we didn't. And then all this accrual accounting stuff came in. I had no clue about what and then they started talking. We started back, talking about operating margin and all that. What's that? And then we flipped it to EBITDA. Ooh, what's EBITDA? Oh, yeah. And there's certain things that come out of EBITDA and make it look better and this and that. I'm like, well, what does all that mean? Right?
These acronyms.
So you're spot on. Jinesh, I think you're exactly correct. You want to affiliate with somebody that's rolling and somebody that's doing well, and maybe they're going to offer you a little bit less. Maybe your valuation is not exactly what you thought it was, or you're not going to get the multiple you thought.
Yeah.
If it's tried and true, you might want to be on tried and true.
I also think there's a little bit of a I'll frame it as a spectrum of the small sort of early emerging group, we'll call it, and then the really large group. And there's a trade-off. If you join the early group, there's less of the playbook established. There are fewer systems in place. It's less of a sophisticated organization, most likely. It's a smaller group. And so you're joining at an earlier stage and you have the potential upside that you don't necessarily when you join a large established group, because the higher multiple is basically already priced in at the time of the transaction, and you as the individual practice selling may see a turn. You're not going to see those multiple turns at time of recap. So it's a trade-off, but I don't even think most selling doctors appreciate that mental framework.
They don't, and I think we need to educate them more on that, because to me it is a deciding factor. Now, early on for me, being able to be in the formative stages of American Dental Partners and who they were, we were talking about having this, pick something, university without walls, continuing education for all kinds of concepts, and having a software system that everyone could use that wasn't off the shelf, and standards and protocols, and where we were going to get all that. And that was just kind of a vision at first. So if a doctor is intrigued by that, I think, Scott, you're right. If someone is thinking about, I want to get on this, I want to help form this. I'm going to bring my one practice to be the fifth practice of 4 or 5, or bring my 3 practices and take them from 7 to 10. And now you're starting to scale. You can be more in the formative portions of this, but that's also how you create your equity, right? Or you create your value. You also create more of a voice if that's what you want to do.
Right.
And then when it comes time to recap it, and it goes from 10, and you roll in with 10 other practices, and or whatever the case might be, you're in a better position. But yeah, if you want to have a voice in how it's formed and built, you can do that.
Yeah.
I have a couple questions about patient centricity and doctor centricity, but Jinesh, we kind of took a long winding path here. I want to make sure we get back to you, and if you had other follow up questions on accreditation, compliance, anything along those lines.
Yeah, I just have a couple to go down that pathway. I think one of the things that was very, Dr. Ray, which was you mentioned when you went to Heartland from ADP, there wasn't that Triple H, there wasn't a regulatory or a compliance or accreditation process that they abided by. One thought is like, how do you think they got that big without having that kind of organizational structure? Because as you mentioned, that was something you looked at Park Dental about, and you said we need this just to grow and scale and have that. I guess that's just one thing I'd love for you to opine on, and then afterwards, I'd love to talk about how you think this might just support where we think the industry is going with medical being a bigger part of the dental conversation and vice versa. But I'd love to start there and then kind of walk through how you think this might play into the future, and maybe if they change their tune in the future.
Again, their model, the Heartland model, is more about the autonomy of the doctor in their practice to make decisions. And they've got a compliance team. They've got some great attorneys that are in-house attorneys that are compliance attorneys. I mean, they're really, really good at what they do. They just didn't have programs or processes like we were used to rolling out where everyone was going to fall under them. It was more of a top-down thing for us at American Dental Partners. They didn't have that. Do they have compliance and compliance? Absolutely, they do.
Yeah.
It's not a matter of them not having those things. It's just they viewed it, again, differently than the way we did. They did not think about it organizationally to have structure and process to ensure quality outcomes. They were relying on the doctor and the practice to make good choices about the way they were going to treat patients to ensure quality. My thing always has been, how do you know? If you don't have a system whereby you can audit and go in and look at what the doctor's doing, maybe it's treatment, but it could be other things too, where you have some oversight. You've got to be able to inspect what you expect in the clinical world, just like you do any other kind of world. So I always kind of struggled with that a bit. Do I think they're a compliant organization? Sure they are. There's no doubt about it. They just went about it differently. But I can tell you, there were times for me, what are those lessons in compliance? And I would ask some rhetorical questions for your listeners on the podcast. Have you ever had an OSHA visit? What do you do when that happens? Have you ever had a state board issue where maybe you got an untoward outcome? Are you helping that doctor through that? Do you have a process whereby you can do that through peer review? Or standardization on the patient record side? What if you have a HIPAA issue? What if you have a data breach? What if you have an impaired provider? Some guy comes in drunk to work one day. What are you going to do? What if you make a bad hire? And your hire's not bad. And I don't mean just somebody's got a bad temper or that, but maybe they don't have a license like they're supposed to, and you haven't gone through a process to ensure that they have a license or a license in your state, or you can even get professional liability insurance for them, or they are even paying it. What about legal issues? What if you just got sued? What are you going to do? What's going to be your process? Does your doctor in the practice know? What if you have a DEA problem with drug logs? DEA comes knocking on your door, and you don't have a chain of custody for drugs, or you have a harassment issue in the practice. People say, that's HR. Is it? If your doctor is harassing people or whatnot, those are 8 things off the top of my head that all happened on my watch. And I thought that, we're solid on this stuff. But because we had processes in place, we were able to catch these things or have a way to deal with them when they came up. And some of these are not one-off things. Some of them happen more than once. So compliance is not just OSHA, HIPAA, that sort of thing. Compliance is more than that. I think about, what about something like if you're using open airway sedation. You better make sure that those machines are compliant. If you have a bad outcome, you want to make sure that they're checked on a regular basis. People say, well, sterilization and monitoring of sterilization. Okay, that's one part of it. Is your sterilizer working? Are you running a sport test on a regular basis? When was the last time the seals were changed on that thing? I mean, we can just go on and on and on. Compliance is not just those two or three things. It's what does the facility look like? Is it a safe place for the patient? Is it a safe place for the team and the practicing doctor? So compliance is a lot of things. So you asked that's one part for me on the compliance thing and do these things really happen? They do. And you better have a plan on how to figure out how you're going to deal with them.
So it's really not just about like being accredited is one thing to show that you have the rigor and the process behind what you are preaching as well. It's not to say that you're not compliant as an organization. It's saying you have a lot of infrastructure behind that you abide by and that you look to whenever something does happen. And you all at least have an understanding of what that is and you've trained your team on it. I think that's a big, big change and difference. It's more of the documentation and process control.
It is. I mean, and you think about what Triple HC is. I mean, it's a spinoff of JCOs we started on a while ago, back from 1979, I think is when they first spun off. They were only concerned. It's a nonprofit organization. It's private. It's an organization. It's a voluntary process that you go through. It's not something you have to go through in dentistry. They don't do solo practitioners. They want to do group practice. This is tailor-made for the DSO that wants to differentiate themselves, in my opinion. It's a way for you to measure against national benchmarks. Are you up to that standard? It's a way to differentiate yourself.
And Scott,
and predictability. Yep, go ahead.
Scott, one thing when I was talking to Dr. Ray earlier, and I wanted to invite him on the podcast, which was, coming from my background in the medical field, and we had Joint Commission, so JCO as he's referring to it. And that's one of the biggest regulatory bodies that exist in medical. And it's all about how are you treating your patients, your environment of care, your processes, your functions, your compliance, all the things that he's mentioning. And there's rules and they have audits and they come to see if you're abiding by your rules and they'll give you sanctions or flags and you go correct them. So the idea is, but if you abide by these things, you're meeting the general governmental standard for what good quality, environments that you have and processes you have that should create good quality outcomes for patients. And that's the real idea. And in the medical world, like we utilize these agencies to keep us in account. And in the dental world, because we don't have them, we don't have as a structure of a process. I know Triple HC and ACHC, which is another organization, have dental standards, but you don't have to abide by them just to get a reimbursement. And that's part of the biggest barrier in the medical world as to why people do this. It's not just to make sure there are great outcomes. It actually activates insurance. It creates it to where you can go get CMS payments and Medicare, Medicaid, and then all the other insurance bodies look at the CMS, say, okay, if you're abiding by those regulatory standards, then we do too. So to get our insurance reimbursements, you need to have accreditation at these standards, and you get higher depending on what level you're at. So if you're just certified, or you're accredited, or you're 5-star, depending on the organization, you get different levels. And when we think about that medical and dental integration that we're all talking about that might happen in the future, what is that world when you have both kinds of care happening maybe in the same building? You probably want to have an accredited dental environment so it's easy to facilitate that future. So you don't have to have standards here that you don't have here. And if everyone's all on the same roof. So that was kind of one of the things that, looking at how much Dr. Ray cares about this and seeing his background and everything he's had to offer, I think he has a very unique perspective on like that.
Yeah, totally. I think dental obviously has a lot to catch up on in terms of compliance from a compliance perspective. Yeah. And it's interesting to me. I mean, I'm learning, it sounds like these regulatory bodies on the medical side are in place to effectively, there's monetary incentive aligned and baked in on the med side, which clearly doesn't exist in dental. And yeah, Ray, to your point, I mean, that list of questions that you rattled off is enough to keep any dentist up at night, because there are
Fortunately for me, I'm a pretty sound sleeper, but most of it was because I knew I had the power of the organization behind me, and we were going to address these kinds of things,
Yeah.
moving forward. And I want to touch on, in the few minutes I guess that we have left here, this medical dental merger stuff that Jinesh is pointing out, and I think Scott, you're headed down the right path. There are not a whole lot of monetary incentives, other than creating more access to care for patients. And we think about, if you think about it just for a minute, we treat the same patients that our physician friends treat. We treat the same. We treat a non-compliant patient. Maybe they never ever go in and see their physician, but they come see us because they have a toothache, and we screen for high blood pressure. We could be screening for diabetes with our high-risk periodontal patients, and refer them over to the medical side. Cancer patients, we're screening those patients. We're treating those patients. Pregnant patient. What happens if the patient is pregnant and they're not treated? We treat those patients. Pedo patients. Think about, they don't come see the dentist first. They come see their pediatrician first. If you guys have kids, they go see the pediatrician first. That's their first encounter. Wouldn't it be great if the pediatrician had a relationship with a pediatric dentist and they were able to refer those patients in-house? We think about that medical dental integration, MDI, and really it's got to be coordinated. I think it would be a little bit more streamlined communication if we were all on the same page between the oral side and the systemic side in terms of how we treat and how we look after the patient population. I just think that are we going to get there at some point in time? I think, though, dentistry, as you just noted, Scott, is way far behind. Jinesh's examples about the regulatory compliance in the medical side. As I said earlier, dentistry is the wild, wild west when it comes to how we view this stuff. If the state board doesn't say anything about it, ADA, gotta love them, but they're pretty toothless when it comes to compliance and getting people to do things. Could they be? Could they be a force for good if they were kind of partnering with some kind of an accrediting body? I think the schools where we're trained as dentists get this because they have to go through a CODA accreditation every 7 years, so they understand it. How do we get more standardization on the dental side so we can be better held accountable for better outcomes for patients and be able to do things like monitor a population of children that we start fluoride on versus kids that don't get it? Well, we already know, but if we see those patients and put them in some kind of registry so that we know that they're getting the care, we're following them through, and because we did fluoride for them, we know they have better outcomes, or sealants, or we treated periodontal disease and we put it into a registry. There's so many things that we could do if we had more structure and process around what we do in dentistry. We would have much better outcomes. It'll probably end up being cost less money.
Right. Yeah. As a periodontist, I certainly appreciate that and appreciate, hey, there should be relationships between perio practices and cardiology offices and endocrinology offices. And I mean, half of their patients are definitionally going to need our help. And us taking care of those patients is going to improve their circumstance from, on the other side of the fence. So there shouldn't be a fence, really, is what we're saying. If I can run over, I know we're a little bit tight on time. I do want to get in a couple questions here. I think you're in a unique position to give your opinion. You are very patient-centric focused, we'll say, and patient-centricity can mean a lot of different things and manifest in a lot of different ways. I want to sort of paint the spectrum of a growing group and differentiate their, for the purposes of this example, we'll paint two models. One is the growing specialty practice that is a, very specific and tight group. They only have whatever ortho offices or perio offices or surgery offices, what have you, versus the sort of multi-specialty, so GP plus multi-specialty kind of model. And there are pros and cons to both of these models. If we look at the specialty specific or the GP only model, it's much, much easier to have a really clean and tight playbook and have tight systems and processes, I think, when you've got one lane essentially. And also, you'll see from a pure finance perspective, you'll see higher multiples on specialty practices. And then on the other side, I think it's my personal opinion that the GP plus multi-specialty model, there's a lot more to tackle. There's a lot more to deal with from a operational perspective, but I think it's actually more patient-centric. It's a better, I'll call it patient/customer experience when you show up to the same place where you get your cleanings, and if you have a filling, you get it done there, and then, oh, wait, you need a root canal. Well, guess what? The endodontist is right here. He or she can tackle that, and you have the convenience and comfort of not having to go anywhere, the under one roof model, so to speak. What are your thoughts on the patient centricity of those two ends of the spectrum, those two models?
Okay. And having been in a general practice, we built our group on general dentistry, and then we started adding specialty to it. I think specialty is harder to manage. The personalities in specialty are a little bit harder to manage. I think that, no offense,
I agree.
The periodontists are the easy guys, but the idea is it is one-stop shopping, and the biggest challenge that we had, though, Scott, was in our model. I'm the doctor, and I want to have the choice of where I send my patient. And part of my job as a leader in the organization was, doctor, doesn't it make sense for you to refer to someone within the organization than someone outside of the organization? Once we got that referral piece down, it did become one-stop shopping. And where we had close proximity, we did it both. We had specialists kind of roll through practices, general practices. And once we got to more of a hub and spoke model where we had hubs for the specialty to be, and they maybe went to 3 different specialty practices, I think it was better because you had kind of birds of a feather. You had all the specialists in one practice and the general dentist and another, ortho being different than that. I think if you do that, once you establish a relationship, then you can get to the one-stop shop. Where you feel like the patient is a patient of the organization and not of just, the doctor. And so referring from Dr. Scott to Dr. Kara Curtis, the oral surgeon, became more seamless. And they liked that, the specialists did. If they could get to the over the referral piece, better for the patient, all those things. But if someone from the outside referred into, and it was hard to get patients externally to come in because they were afraid they were going to get gobbled up in this big machine, they had to make sure those patients went back to that referring doctor. It was very critical. So is it good for the patient? Absolutely. We had the same computer system. Our x-rays were all in the same place. Radiographs were all in the same place. We had the same consent forms. It was the same patient record as it related to the financial aspect, all in the same place. So we knew if the patient was going from GP to an oral surgeon, how much of their insurance they'd used already. We didn't have to figure all that stuff out. So it was a lot better for the patient from a communication standpoint. Do I think that there's still a place for specialty DSOs? Absolutely. I think that they can bring a lot to bear in some of the really big markets or places that are underserved that don't have specialty and do well financially. So yeah, to answer your question, I think it is good for the patient.
Yeah, I wonder in the back of my mind, if we play this movie forward 10 years, if those large specialty groups then get gobbled up by the really large general national groups. So like Aspen, bought Clear Choice. We see more and more of that kind of, I'll call it cross specialty alignment or GP to specialty alignment in the same organization.
I can also remember too, going to my first oral surgeon to talk to about coming in with us. And they were hell no, I'm not going to join a group. There's no way, but most of those guys are from a medical model too. And I think that what we need to look at, and your example right now, is there are probably a lot of physician groups out there that have acquired, through the course of time, all specialty. And a lot of those niche specialists have survived, whether, ENT, orthopod, you pick some. They all have their specialty groups, but they all maybe be practicing in a physician-owned hospital or maybe a network of hospitals and such. So I mean, we follow that, and I don't think they've all lost their identity.
I want to shift and get the last $1 million question in here, which is doctor-centricity. And everybody today, the biggest challenge is attracting talent and holding on to that talent. So hiring not just the doctors, but all of the support staff and hygienists and assistants, et cetera. What do you see as the biggest key to success on that front, hiring and maintaining that technical talent?
First and foremost, I think you have to be about the people that you work with. You have to be committed to not just the patient, but you have to have a very people-centric organization. You have to have a place that people want to come to work to, where they feel valued, where they have open lines of communication, they have opportunity for growth, and they see a pathway forward. I think another thing that's really, you have to reward those folks and that are in your practices. I fortunately, in my practice career, when I was at the chair, I didn't have a whole lot of turnover in dental assistants. I loved my dental assistants, and they loved what we did in terms of taking care of patients. Hygiene, we had a lot of hygienists in the practice that had been there for years and years, but it was because of all those things. We valued what they had to say. They knew that the patient was going to come in, and we were going to take care of the patient like the patient was family. So I think you have to create that. And I think all too often we get lost in that, and sometimes in corporate dentistry. It gets too big. The local people are not being able to make the decisions about, how do we be competitive in the marketplace when it comes to compensation? And does my 18-year-old dental assistant care if they have insurance benefits? They'd rather have $2 an hour, more. And can you talk about that up, in the bigger organization? When you are recruiting doctor talent, I think doctors want now, they want to have security. I think many of them are risk averse nowadays. We were talking about buying into whole co and those kinds of things. The entrepreneurial dentist, maybe, but most young dentists are, they're scared to death, and they get out there and they want to have a mentor. They want to have someone that's going to take care of them. And I think the organization has to provide that. They have to provide a way for the doctor to be onboarded. You don't just drop them in there. Don't drop them in the frying pan. They got to be able to ask questions and be supported. They got to know they're going to be supported. They got to know they're going to make mistakes. One of these days, when we have a lot of time, I'll tell you about my first few weeks of practice. Feeling that you have someone that you can kind of rely on, and that's going to be there to help you, not look over your shoulder and scold you, but give you a sense of belonging, and you build the culture. And then whatever those words are on the wall that you talk about in your organization, you damn sure better live to them, because if you don't, those are going to be the people saying they're not who they say they are, and they're going to offload really quickly. So creating a team, creating a family, having a place where people can grow and develop and be nurtured, and allow them to make mistakes, because they're going to make them, but give them structure around what it is that your expectations are and how you want them to grow, and work with them to develop them. And I think you can retain them. It's not always about the percentage that you're going to pay somebody, but really what are the soft skills, hard skills that they're going to get out of it, and how can you translate that to them? But in the end, they've got to figure out how to become productive dentists, because dentistry is all about taking care of patients, and you got to figure out how to do that. All right, because if you don't, you're going to starve.
So to summarize back, it sounds like supportive culture is probably the number one most important thing. Career advancement and growth just baked into the system. And then another little tidbit you sort of alluded to there was that different people may be incentivized by different things. And so there's no sense giving, let's say, JV equity to somebody that actually would prefer 29% over 27% of their production, as an example. Or, would prefer the $2 an hour more than whatever. So yeah, no, I've thought similarly, but nice to hear it from you as well.
And the other part, you've got to recruit all the time. You've got to be recruiting all the time. I mean, you can't wait and you got to be talking to your team.
Yeah.
You got to be talking to, whether you're talking about a dental assistant, you're talking about a practice manager or the dentist, the hygienist, you got to be talking to them, know about where they are. It's relational.
Yeah.
And, I think that's foreign too, for many people now, because they want to be on their phones doing stuff, or, and I don't want to talk about generational differences, but it's still about people taking care of people.
Right.
And generations.
Lots to consider. Well, this has been an awesome conversation. Ray, thank you so much for coming on and joining. I don't know if Jinesh, if you had any final thoughts or questions, or Ray, if you had anything you wanted to add for the audience, but this has been great.
Yeah, Jinesh, did you have anything?
Honestly, I appreciate you coming on. I was getting excited when we were talking earlier about how much you care about these more like the boring things that I care about, like the compliance and the accreditation side, and how is that jump going to happen from dental to medical and vice versa. And I think if there's any resources for those that might be curious, like about that process and how to even think about it, do you have any that you would like to share just for people to know where to go? I know the OSAP organization is a place, but I didn't know if you had any go-to places that you're like,
that's a good one. That's a very good one. And we touched on earlier some of organized dentistry. You can go to ADA website, and there's some things there about compliance and such. Your state boards will have them. It's going to be more about compliance specific to them. And then there's specific organizations. One of them that I've consulted with for a while, Simmons Safe, is a great resource for that to start to help you get your ship in kind of an on some of these lower hanging fruit things, OSHA, HIPAA, things that you think, I don't need to be worried about those. You do. And if you ever want to sell your practice, you better for sure have all those things lined up. But for me, this has been a great opportunity to just visit. I love to kind of kick the can down the road. And I also like the conversational aspect of it, that it's not just one thing. You guys do a great job stimulating, and getting my brain to think about things maybe that I hadn't thought about in a while. So I appreciate that. I appreciate the opportunity to come on and share a little bit about what I know and where I've been. And it's a long, winding road.
Ray, you've been an awesome guest. If any of the audience wants to reach out to you, what's the best way for them to do so?
My email is mrsjrdds@.com. Those are my initials. Not Mrs. Junior, which everyone thinks it is, but it's mrsjrdds@me.com.
There you have it, folks. All right. This has been another amazing episode of the Open Wide podcast.
Wonderful.
Take care, everyone. All right.